how many Republicans would vote to pass it and to get a sense of how many Democrats would have to join them to help. We are now seeing that Democrat dam breaking. All members of leadership, from Leader Hakeem Jeffries to Whip Catherine Clark to the Vice Chair Pete Aguilar, all of them voting yes on the rule. This is a pretty wild moment, given the fact that this is not how things usually work up here. Rules are not typically passed in bipartisan fashion, but it speaks to the realities that we've seen with this House Republican conference. Many of the members who are voting no, vocal about it just in the last few minutes here on the steps with me as they went in to cast their no votes. This is how we thought it was going to go, but it's also why this is such a politically thorny and tricky issue, not just for the Democrats who are crossing over here. They say that they're doing the right thing, aiding our allies in Ukraine and in Israel and in the Indo-Pacific, but for Republicans, specifically Speaker Mike Johnson, who basically said as much last night in an interview on a conservative network. He said, Republicans only control one chamber here, and I barely control this chamber. Another nod to the fact that this rowdy Republican conference has really been a consistent thorn in his side. What this does tee up, though, Jose, and as we're watching those vote totals, the time is technically 0, but it's the first and only vote of the day, and sometimes it takes members a little while to get on the floor and actually cast their votes. But what this does tee up is a Saturday session where, likely tomorrow afternoon, we are going to see the House vote on these 4 separate bills that would provide aid to Ukraine, to Israel, the Indo-Pacific, and then a potpourri of other priorities that are included in a 4th bill. One of those includes legislation around banning TikTok. But this all tees it up. This is the procedural motion that had to happen in order for us to get to Saturday. And now here we are, though it's not official till the gavel is sounded in that room.
And so, Ali, and we look at the numbers, I mean, they're pretty strong yays, more than 300 yays so far. But if you could kind of explain to us a little bit about how unusual it is that in the Rules Committee, the vote would be a bipartisan vote when the Rules Committee, which is the committee that really determines what is and or not able to be discussed and voted on at the floor, normally just takes a party line vote.
Yeah. They're the gatekeepers, Jose. The Rules Committee are the gatekeepers to whatever legislation will then ultimately get a full floor vote. That's why we are here today watching this vote playing out, because late last night, the Rules Committee did something, and they did it in a very rare way. You're right that this is typically a committee that functions solely based on party lines. Republicans have the majority, ever narrow as it may be, and certainly they have the majority on that committee. The problem being that 3 conservative Republicans were outspoken about the fact that they were not going to vote yes on getting this rule to the floor. It was a big enough priority for Democrats that all 4 of the Democrats on that Rules Committee banded together and in rare fashion helped to pass this rule out of that committee and onto the House floor. Again, a reminder of the way that this House works and a reminder of the way that Republicans are effectively bucking their leadership in plain sight. What that vote last night is going to lead to, though, and we've heard murmurs of this already before it even happened, was many disgruntled Republicans. They are exercising those. And so this is really a moment where the decisions that Republicans and Kevin McCarthy made in the very beginning of this Congress are now coming back to sprout and to show what the impact of that actually is.
Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill, thank you so very much. And turning now to more breaking news this morning from inside a Manhattan courtroom where jury selection in former President Trump's hush money trial continues. Right now, the prosecution and the defense are working through candidates to fill the final 5 seats for alternate jurors in a process that was expected to potentially take weeks. A busy Thursday afternoon led the selection of a full panel of 12 jurors to decide Donald Trump's first criminal trial. They include 5 women and 7 men whose identities the judge has ordered to be kept confidential during the trial. Judge Juan Merchan says he hopes to select the remaining alternate jurors today and start opening statements on Monday. A reminder, Trump has pleaded not guilty to all 34 counts and denied the affairs of the 2 women involved in the case. Joining us now from outside the courthouse, NBC News correspondent Yasmin Vasukian. Also with us, Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney in Michigan and an MSNBC legal analyst, and David Henderson, civil rights attorney and former prosecutor. So, Yasmin, what's the latest from inside the courthouse this morning?
We started out with 22 today. We're down to 19. 3 so far have been excused from the jury pool that showed up early this morning. One of them because of fear and anxiety, fear for her identity being revealed. One saying, after thinking about it overnight, doesn't think that they can necessarily be impartial. We've got some interesting characters, Jose, in this jury pool, which will prove to be fairly interesting when we get to the voir dire portion of the Q&A, when both the prosecution and the defense will be asking their own questions of these potential jurors. Let me read for you some of the quotes that we're getting from inside the courtroom from these potential jurors. The one that was excused said, "I don't think I can be fair and impartial." This was a potential juror who had said that they were watching Fox News, mostly reading the Wall Street Journal as well at that moment in which she talked about watching Fox News. I'm told Donald Trump looked in her direction, was more interested in hearing the rest of those answers. We're hearing from inside the courthouse that he's very interested in those people that seem to be more politically ambiguous, jurors that seem to be more politically ambiguous, passing notes, for instance, to his attorney, Todd Blanche, in those moments in which he feels as if possibly maybe a juror would be more in their favor than not. Seat number 14 is a male and talked about volunteering for Get Out the Vote for the Democratic Party during the Clinton campaign and attending a women's march as well. I'm also told in that moment the former president kind of perked up looking in the direction of this potential juror as well. And there was another interesting potential juror, a woman who says her father is a lifelong friend of Governor Chris Christie. In this moment, I'm told the former president kind of smirked, I should say, in talking about his former foe, of course, back in 2016, Governor Chris Christie, and at one point, longtime ally, and then went on to say that Michael Cohen, right, the star witness of this case, Michael Cohen's son actually works at this potential juror's company. And so there's a lot of interesting kind of nuggets to take away from this potential jury pool. And we're going to all kind of hear that come out, of course, in that Q&A portion of the voir dire. And one more thing, Jose, that voir dire process is extended by 5 minutes for each side.
Done anything improper, but what often happens in jury selection is you ask who here cannot be fair and impartial. People raise their hand, but then you have follow-up. Okay, listen, if I explain the law to you, are you telling me you're going to disregard the law, or can you set your bias aside and sit and hear the evidence on this case and be fair and impartial? People often say yes, and then it becomes a battle about who can rehabilitate those people or get them stricken for a reason that says they essentially can't comply with the law. So when you take that out and you excuse jurors when they just raise their hands, things are going to move much more quickly than they normally would.
And so what would you think is probably what would be the better way to sift through these people?
I can tell you what I think the better way is from the perspective of a trial lawyer, because as a trial lawyer, you always want to have more time to spend talking with the jurors so you have a better sense of who may or may not vote your way. And the only way you get that is to spend time talking to them individually. I've had jury selection last as long as 6 weeks, although that's rare. Normally it takes a day. You don't even have it go more than 1 day. But I say that because here, when you look at this makeup, the people that make us nervous as trial lawyers tend to be other attorneys, and engineers also make us very nervous. The reason why is because they can say, you know what, I don't agree with this law, but it's still the law and I'm going to follow it. And so you typically want to know more about an individual like that, because having one is a threat. Here on this jury panel, you've got 3 so far. That's 25% of your jury.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara, with the limited information we do have, what do you make of the jury so far?
You know, it's really interesting, Jose, because the jury selection is purported to be this, incredible science and all of the scrutiny. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is based on hunches and even stereotypes, assumptions that people have certain worldviews based on the kind of job that they have. As we heard, engineers or lawyers or people who think about things more methodically versus other people who might make decisions more on gut feeling than on facts. But it strikes me as, a jury that, although, as David just said, we have not really met them and heard a whole lot of them up close, I think that we've weeded out everybody who is at least identified by themselves a bias against Donald Trump. And then with this 42-question series of questions, I think this is about as good as these lawyers are going to get in terms of understanding what these jurors are all about. Now, certainly there's always the opportunity for someone to be less than truthful or misleading and hiding a bias that they may have. But I think this is the best that we're going to do. And so far, I think this jury seems just fine.
Yeah, and what about the fact that there are 3 attorneys on there? Is that unusual?
It's very unusual. You know, as a lawyer myself, when I would pick a jury, I often would excuse lawyers from the jury, because what I worried about wasn't that they were going to rule for me or against me, but that they were going to become someone that the rest of the jury would look to out of deference. That, you know, who am I to decide? I'm not a lawyer. Let's ask the lawyer. What does the lawyer think? But when you have three, then maybe they neutralize each other. The other thing, as a lawyer, I tended to want people who were educated, people who might be able to work through sometimes complicated jury instructions, keep track of all of the evidence, and then make a very elemental decision about the evidence here. I could see, and so lawyers might be good for that reason. And with three, they might neutralize that jury of one concern that I would have. From a defense perspective, I might be less interested in having juries on board because.
What's been the former president's demeanor inside court today?
He seems more involved, Jose. I've been getting a lot of notes from inside the courtroom. He seems more involved in picking these alternate jurors than he has been in the last few days. And I only say that because of kind of being more animated in the courtroom, especially when it comes to some of the answers that we're hearing from these potential jurors. I will say we also heard from the former president earlier today as well, talking about the gag order. Remember, there are 7 potential violations being filed for this gag order. The former president stopped for cameras before he entered the courtroom early this morning, and he said the gag order should be lifted. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The gag order has to come off. People are allowed to speak about me, and I have a gag order, just to show you how much more unfair it is.
Valley? Okay.
So just to let you know, there's going to be a hearing, Jose, on the gag order on Tuesday, right? And I think the idea in anticipating this hearing and the gag order will be how Judge Juan Merchan deals with it, right? We remember back to Judge Engoron, and he held Donald Trump in contempt of that gag order 2 separate times, in which he had to pay a fee over those 2 separate times of $15,000, right? So we'll be watching to see kind of how Judge Juan Merchan kind of sets the temperature for his courtroom throughout this trial.
Yeah, David, is there any chance the gag order could be lifted?
I don't think the gag order is going to be lifted. I think we're going to have an ongoing problem with this trial, which reminds me of an old legend that we had about a Texas